Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Wednesday, July 17th. Today is the 285th day of bombing in Gaza since hostages have been taken, of what many in the world are calling Israel's war on Hamas, of what others are calling a genocide. 285 days since October 7th. There's been significant internal discord within Israel. The Knesset rejected a bill to establish a state commission of inquiry into the events of October 7th. 53 members of the Knesset opposed the proposal that was submitted by Farkash of the National Unity Party and Cohen of the Yesh Atid Party, while 51 supported it, almost evenly divided. The National Unity Party head, Benny Gantz, said that Netanyahu delayed the Israeli army's entry into Khan Yunis in Rafah in South Gaza. He said everything will be revealed when protocols and testimonies are heard at a national commission of inquiry. Netanyahu rejected calls for a formation of this National Commission of Inquiry. The inquiry would identify the failures of Israel to be able to protect its citizens. This is the great promise of the state, to provide security to all of its citizens in theory, but 80% of the population of Israel are Jewish citizens. The entire population is about 8 million people or so. And Netanyahu responded to this commission of inquiry and said that he was rejecting it because, first, I want to beat Hamas. He claimed Israel systematically moving towards reaching the war's goals, freeing hostages, defeating Hamas, making sure Gaza is no longer a threat. Now, what we hear on the ground and what we hear from political actors is that actually he's just biding time until the U.S. elections and until there is a more favorable political environment on the horizon. And who is suffering in the midst of it? Innocent civilians. Opposition leader Lapid told Netanyahu if he does not intend to say in front of the U.S. Congress, which is on July 24th, that he agrees to a hostage deal, then he should cancel his visit. Lapid criticized Netanyahu for a government meeting in which the PM chose to discuss incitement against him instead of talking about hostages. So just a reminder, this Sunday is Solidarity Sunday. Please, please, please have your churches or mosques or synagogues pray for peace, call for a comprehensive ceasefire. There are resources on CMEP's website about Solidarity Sunday. We'll be having prayer the morning of Netanyahu's visit on July 24th. Mossad chief Barnea said Netanyahu's insistence that a mechanism be established for monitoring the movement of Gazans from South to North Gaza could thwart a possible deal with Hamas, and that, quote, the women hostages do not have much time to wait. The U.S. State Department said today that it's imposing a visa ban on Elor Azaria, who's an Israeli Defense Forces soldier who was convicted of killing an incapacitated Palestinian assailant in 2017. And in relationship to the Hezbollah-Israeli escalations, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, said that if Israel intensifies its attacks on civilians, Nasrallah said that if Israel intensifies its attacks, that Hezbollah will respond by widening the rocket fire, which would target an increased number of Israeli towns and cities. The Israeli army said that 40 rockets were launched from northern Israel from Lebanon. Some were intercepted. Hezbollah said it launched this barrage in the response to the reported killing of 3 children from an Israeli attack in southern Lebanon earlier yesterday on Tuesday. Dozens of Hezbollah rockets sparked fires in northern Israel. 7 rockets damaged homes in Kiryat Shmona, and no casualties were reported. In Gaza, at least 81 Palestinians were killed in Israeli strikes in the last 24 hours. According to health officials, there is an unrelenting bombardment that has continued almost every day this past week that's happening on Gaza. At least 8 UN, United Nations run schools that have been sheltering people have been hit in the past 10 days. I just want you to hear that. 8 UN run schools in 10 days. In 9 months of war, 70% of UNRWA facilities have been bombed. 539 people sheltering in UNRWA facilities have been killed. Whereas I want you to hear the difference between the ways this is reported in Israeli news sources. This Israeli news source is Haaretz. Listen to how the last 24 hours has been reported in Haaretz, and then listen to how it's reported by Al Jazeera, which comes from Qatar. In Haaretz, they reported Israeli forces hit areas in central Gaza, killing 9 Palestinians, according to health officials, while Israeli tanks carried out a limited advance further into Rafah in the south. Medics said 2 people were killed in an Israeli airstrike on Rafah. The Israeli army said that its forces attacked a rocket launch in northern Gaza on Tuesday, killing a terror cell. The IDF said its forces continue to operate in the southern Gazan city of Rafah and in central and north Gaza. The IDF forces are operating, okay? That's Haaretz. That's what Israeli people, and that's actually considered a liberal newspaper in Israel. Listen to what Al Jazeera says, and Al Jazeera is considered, so Haaretz, my point is more moderate. It's considered liberal in Israel, but it's not so extreme. Al Jazeera
This is Al Jazeera English, so this is not, far Arab source, but it's more pro-Palestinian. So listen to what Al Jazeera says about the last 24 hours. 9 Palestinians, including 3 children, killed in an Israeli airstrike at the Cairo school in the Ramal neighborhood in western Gaza City. An Israeli strike killed 4 people in the Shati refugee camp in East Gaza City. An elderly man was killed in an Israeli airstrike on a house in the western part of Nusrat camp in the center of Gaza. 5 Palestinians, including 3 children and a woman, were killed in an Israeli airstrike on the home of Alan family of Abbasan, East Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. An Israeli airstrike on Al-Shukshuk, northwest of Rafah, killed 2 Palestinians. Amin Abed, an anti-Hamas activist from Gaza, is now in critical condition after several masked men kidnapped and beat him in the northern Gaza Strip last week. That last part was from Haaretz again. So I just wanted you to see the difference. And, I had a leader tell me once, you have to read news from multiple sources to have any clear picture of what's happening. Let me just say, dozens and dozens of people are still being killed in Gaza every day. Our work is not, our work has just begun. Pray for peace, continue to work for a comprehensive ceasefire. I want you to hear the rest of the news from the day. Amin Abed, this anti-Hamas activist in Gaza, is now in critical condition after several masked men kidnapped and beat him in North Gaza last week. He had made a Facebook post criticizing Hamas on the day that he was assaulted. The death toll, according to the health ministry in Gaza, is 38,794 Palestinians killed, at least. And those wounded is at least 89,364 wounded since October 7th. In terms of ceasefire negotiations, there's been a lot of conversation about Netanyahu's visit to the United States. There's been a lot of conversation in Israel between families of members of the hostages. One member who's a cousin, he has a cousin who is held hostage named Ofer. His name is Yafat Calderon. He urged the released hostage, Noah Argamani, not to fly with Netanyahu for his trip to Washington, saying he's using you. Others will pay for it with their lives. Relatives of Israeli hostages held in Gaza demanded clarifications today, following a report where Netanyahu was quoted as saying the hostages are suffering, but they are not dying. I'm speaking on the news from released photos of the first days in captivity of the female Israeli Defense Forces field spotters who were taken hostage on the 7th. The Hostage and Missing Families Forum demanded Netanyahu look these girls in the eyes, try to imagine what they and all the hostages have endured for 284 days, and do everything possible to bring them home. Do everything possible to keep children in Gaza alive. Do everything possible to bring prisoners who are held unjustly in Israeli prisons to be set free. A few other things. Eli Elbag, whose daughter Liri is being held captive in Gaza, said that the last indication she had that the spotters are still alive, that was 2 months ago. Ronan and Orna Nutra are the parents of U.S. Israeli hostage Omer Nutra. They will address the Republican National Convention. That was today. Their speech is intended to keep the hostages on Americans' minds. And today in the West Bank, the Israeli Defense Forces mapped the homes of, quote, terrorists who killed Israeli children Amnon Mukhtar, Israeli citizen Amnon Mukhtar, 66, in the West Bank city of Kalkia last month. These homes were mapped according to the IDF. They entered the city to make plans for the demolition of the homes, of the perpetrators. The U.S. announced today, this was breaking news, the pier was a failure, the troubled Gaza pier mission that shifted humanitarian operation to the Israeli port. So that was officially announced today. U.S. officials say the floating structure enabled delivery of millions of pounds of food, aid, etc. What nonsense. I mentioned this in one of my recent updates. Far-right groups that block aid to Gaza receive tax-deductible donations from the U.S. and Israel. The Associated Press did a more fleshed-out report on this. The groups that have prevented aid, including one accused of looting and destroying supplies, have raised more than $200,000 from donors in the U.S. and Israel, according to the Associated Press, that they are receiving U.S. tax donations. I wanted to call this to your attention. Human Rights Watch issued a report today, Wednesday, July 17th, called "I Cannot Erase All of the Blood from My Mind. Palestinian Armed Groups, October 7th, the Assault on Israel." This is a report about the attacks of October 7th. Human Rights Watch has said that there were serious violations by all of the groups who perpetrated the attacks on civilians on the 7th, in addition to numerous serious violations by Israeli forces since October 7th. Key points: the Qassam brigades, the Hamas military wing, and at least 4 other Palestinian armed groups have committed crimes against humanity against civilians on October 7th and the assault on southern Israel. According to Human Rights Watch, Hamas-led groups committed war crimes. That was one of the summaries. Palestinian fighters committed summary killings, hostage-taking, murder and wrongful imprisonment, and governments with influence over Palestinian armed groups should press for the urgent release of civilian hostages. And my last comment is that in the broader Middle East, Syria's leader, Assad, said that he would only meet with Turkey's head, Erdogan, if core issues are addressed, that they would focus on issues of terrorism and that Turkish forces would pull out of Syrian territory. So that is the news for the day. Continue to pray for peace, to work towards justice. In the name of Christ, amen.